Good evening. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We are only 3 days into August, and already the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season is moving at a record-breaking pace. Isaias is on track to become the third hurricane to threaten the U.S. in just the last 2 weeks. Wind, heavy rain, and rough surf are expected all along the Carolina coastline as the storm moves in. And that's before the storm makes a run up the I-95 corridor, threatening flash flooding in some of the most populated pockets of the country. Of course, all of this is happening as the COVID death toll continues to rise, and also on the rise, uncertainty and anxiety for those wondering what to do if they need to seek shelter in the middle of a pandemic. Our Eva Pilgrim leads us off from Myrtle Beach.
Tonight, outer bands of Isaias closing in on the Carolinas and threatening the entire East Coast with powerful winds and life-threatening storm surge.
It's moving quickly enough that it won't really have a chance to weaken.
In New York City, they're putting up mile-long barriers in low-lying areas to keep the water out. Coronavirus cases and deaths on the rise in several of the states in Isaias' path. Florida avoiding a direct hit, but forced to close some outdoor testing sites because of Isaias' winds. The Carolinas might not be as lucky.
Shelters will screen people for coronavirus symptoms. Shelters will have PPE and will honor social distancing.
Been here 35 years. We've never seen a situation like this where the hospital has been under this much stress.
Weeks ago, Tidelands Medical Center, just outside Myrtle Beach, had to call the National Guard to help handle all their COVID cases. Tonight, preparing to face a surge in patients.
The hospital is absolutely full with COVID. The ICU is, we're over capacity, the ER is, and now with the storm coming, it's just something else to deal with.
Isaias killed at least 3 in the Caribbean, knocking out power to nearly 500,000 on Puerto Rico. It could stay at or near tropical storm strength all the way to New England.
People certainly bracing for the worst. Eva Pilgrim joins us now. Storm surge and inland flooding, that's the #1 killer from these types of systems. And Eva, you're learning that Isaias is hitting at a time that could make the flood threat even higher.
Yeah, the timing of this is not good for this area. The storm surge is expected to be 3 to 5 feet, and this storm will be coming on land in this area right about the same time as high tide. The other thing to remember, tonight is a full moon, so that means a higher than normal tide and a significant risk of flash flooding. That is the major thing that people need to be concerned about. The other thing they're really concerned about here, Lindsay, is tornadoes. This area is under a tornado watch until 2 a.m. Lindsay?
The perfect storm with the moon and all of that. Okay, Eva, thank you so much. And now let's bring in Rob Marciano, who's just a bit up the coast from Eva in Wilmington, North Carolina. Rob, walk us through the track of this storm.
This track is remarkable, Lindsay, only because it's really going to impact everyone on the East Coast. I can't remember a storm that has done this, maybe Hurricane Donna back in 1960, where we had watches and warnings all the way up and down the East Coast. Take a look. This is exactly what we have tonight, at least north of South Carolina. We're under a hurricane warning where I stand, tropical storm warnings and watches all the way up through New England, and that pretty much mimics the track. Of course, we've got the flood potential inland also, but the track takes it right up I-95, up the turnpike, and over New York City tomorrow afternoon. Let's break it down a little bit more for you. Tornado watches are posted for tonight ahead of the storm. The landfall is expected sometime around midnight. And as it brings that hurricane force winds, a storm surge 2 to 5 feet from Myrtle Beach up to Wilmington is where we think landfall will occur, and then accelerate as it goes in through North Carolina, Raleigh, then Richmond tomorrow. Brief tornadoes all possible during the day. A very strong jet stream, probably going to bring some of those winds down to the surface. So I think it's going to be windy, damaging winds all the way up through D.C. tomorrow morning. And then tomorrow afternoon into Philadelphia. Heaviest rains will be inland. That's where the flooding is going to occur. Storm surge, of course, off towards the east, towards the coast, and then right over New York City Metro tomorrow afternoon. Weakening somewhat as it heads into New England and Canada tomorrow night. But this is a track that is certainly remarkable, impacting everyone along the East Coast. It is accelerating. That's good. It will pick up speed. But when it comes through, it will be intense. And it will be intense for the next 30 hours, Lindsay, along the East Coast.
Our thanks to you, Rob. Stay safe out there. We're joined now by Bruce Arnold, the emergency manager in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where Isaias is expected to make landfall tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We know it must be hectic there, so we really appreciate your time. What has your community been doing to prepare for this storm today, and what sort of impact are you expecting?
Well, city workers today have spent the day preparing our beach and our parks, picking up all loose items and such. We do have visitors in town. There was not an evacuation order, so we're asking everybody to just please stay inside, especially until the morning. We don't expect to get tropical storm force winds till around 8 o'clock. It's picking up out there now. We're hoping that after midnight, 1 a.m., this thing will move out of here and we can get back to business.
Yeah, relatively unscathed, we hope. The storm, of course, skirted Florida, but South Carolina is now in the direct path. What's your message to residents who are in that path tonight, and what should they be doing right now and in the days ahead? I know that you said that basically shelter in place, but beyond that.
Yeah, especially with this new normal that we're experiencing, our messaging has been to be prepared. As always, have a kit, stay inside, stay tuned to your local media, Facebook, Twitter. We do a lot of Facebook and Twitter during these situations. To repeat myself, we're just asking everybody right now to shelter in place, ride this thing out, and hopefully we can wake up tomorrow morning and have weathered this pretty good.
And we know that city services across the country are already stretched thin by coronavirus. How has that impacted your ability to prepare for this storm, and how could it impact responding to the storm's aftermath?
Well, as far as my EOC is concerned, we do have a COVID plan. We've reduced staffing in the EOC. We're doing a lot of stuff virtually. As far as our response is concerned, it's not going to affect us too much. However, again, we've done a lot of upgrades in the EOC as far as sheltering our ESF occupants and allowing them to wear masks and such. But we're prepared. But it is challenging in this COVID environment to do anything like this.
And this is already one of the most active hurricane seasons ever, and it's only the first week of August. So do you have the resources to handle the potential of multiple storm threats this hurricane season? Is that something that you're already preparing for?
We can handle it. I'm not saying that we're looking forward to it, but, we've been through this before. Our city services are accustomed to working in these conditions. Again, we're a tourist population, so that's our biggest concern right now is having all these tourists in town and hoping that they heed the warnings. But as far as our resources are concerned, we're prepared for just about anything.
Myrtle Beach Emergency Manager Bruce Arnold, we thank you so much for your time. Stay safe out there.
Thank you.
And now to our other major headline, the alarming news about the relentless spread of COVID-19 here in the U.S. White House Task Force member Dr. Burks saying we're in a new phase. And as we enter a new month, the death toll now surpassing 155,000 Americans. Today also marked the first day of school for some children in Georgia. Nearly 300 teachers and staff in one district out sick, either infected by the virus or exposed to it. Our Steve Osensami has more on the difficult decisions that parents and teachers are now making.
In the middle of this pandemic, it is back to school today for the Adamus family in Paulding County, Georgia. And for many families across the country whose school systems are offering in-person instruction.
I'm trying not to cry. That was hard.
Here, the kids aren't required to wear masks, but the Adamus children will be wearing them anyway.
I'm sweating under this. I don't know how a 5-year-old is going to be able to handle it.
About an hour and a half to the east in Gwinnett County, Georgia, school hasn't started yet, but already nearly 300 teachers and staff are out sick. teachers who tested positive for COVID-19 or were exposed to someone who was infected. In Mississippi and Indiana, the list of states is growing where teachers and students are testing positive just as parents are getting kids back into classes.
In my mind, I'm thinking, here we go.
In Washington, the White House task force coordinator is saying that all corners of the country are struggling with the virus.
I want to be very clear. What we're seeing today is different from March and April. It is extraordinarily widespread. It's into the rural as equal urban areas.
Getting that message across is a challenge. Positive rates are climbing in 25 states. California alone now has more than 500,000 cases. In New York, authorities arrested the owner of this party boat after photos showed big parties with little social distancing. In New Jersey, they believe that large parties have led to larger transmission, and now the governor is putting a limit on most indoor gatherings to 25 people.
We cannot move forward if a few knuckleheads think the rules don't apply to them or they think they can be cute and skate by with a wink and a nod.
A vaccine can't come soon enough, and Eli Lilly is now in the final stages of testing an antibody treatment that, if it works, could be given at nursing homes and clinics until a vaccine is ready.
The hope is that this is going to be not just a defense, but an offense, and not only kind of hold back this virus, but hopefully conquer it.
Families in Georgia are saying prayers tonight for Justin Hunter. The coronavirus claimed the lives of both of his parents just last week.
Their temperature is skyrocketed. They had headaches, a horrible cough.
Boy, losing both of his parents. Steve Osunsami joins us now from Atlanta, Georgia. And Steve, you talked to teachers today who are in school preparing for classes. What did they share as their biggest concerns?
Well, one teacher who I talked with said that she was frightened because even though there were no students in school today was her first day back, she was very concerned about the ventilation and the fact that she felt there were too many teachers in the building. And in her school, some of the parents were actually allowed to bring their children to school with them, and that was a concern for her, even though she was just really working from her classroom and is going to be teaching students remotely. But overall, there is a great deal of concern that teachers have, not only if they have to at some point continue with in-person instruction, but just in being in the school buildings, if that's what they have to do in some cases.
And Steve, let's also talk about that antibody treatment for seniors. How does it work, and how is it safely tested on such a vulnerable group like the elderly?
So the antibody treatment works very similar to the antibodies that we're very familiar with that come from blood plasma donations from people who've already gotten sick with the virus, except in this case, those antibodies are created in a lab by a drug maker and tested to make sure that they work. The drug maker in this case says that so far this treatment is proving to be safe. Lindsay.
Okay, Steve Osunsami, thanks so much for your reporting. And next tonight, those comments from Dr. Deborah Burks that are drawing fire from President Trump. Dr. Burks over the weekend contradicted the president's take on the outbreak, saying the coronavirus is now extraordinarily widespread. So now, for the first time, the president is openly attacking Dr. Burks, as he's repeatedly done with Dr. Anthony Fauci. ABC's White House correspondent Rachel Scott has more on the back and forth.
Tonight, President Trump blasting Dr. Deborah Burks, calling her pathetic after she warned the pandemic has entered a new phase and the virus is extraordinarily widespread.
The virus is receding. In hotspots across the South and West, we've seen slow improvements.
This is the first time the president has publicly gone after his coronavirus task force coordinator, who has a West Wing office and briefs him regularly. Writing in a tweet, in order to counter Nancy, Deborah took the bait and hit us. Referring to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who slammed Dr. Burks for letting the president's false claims go unchecked.
I think the president is spreading disinformation about the virus, and she is his appointee. So I don't have confidence there, no.
I have never been called Pollyannish or non-scientific or non-data driven.
At his briefing late today, President Trump insisted the U.S. is seeing significant progress.
I think we're doing very well. I told Dr. Burks I think we're doing very well. She was in my office a little while ago. She's a person I have a lot of respect for.
Dr. Burks is the latest public health expert to find herself on the wrong side of the president. He's attacked Dr. Anthony Fauci on testing, contradicted Admiral Brett Giroir on hydroxychloroquine, even shutting down a nurse in the Oval Office in May over the availability of PPE.
So PPE has been sporadic, but it's been manageable.
Sporadic for you, but not sporadic for a lot of other people.
Oh, no, I agree, Mr. President.
Wearing a mask in public just 3 times, the president has fueled an anti-mask movement embraced by Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert, who just last week announced he was positive with COVID-19. His daughter now pleading with Americans, tweeting, "My father ignored medical expertise and now he has COVID. It's not worth following a president who has no remorse for leading his followers to an early grave."
Quite a scathing criticism there. Rachel Scott joins us now. And Rachel, we heard from Joe Biden today on this back and forth. What did he have to say?
We did, Lindsay. He's firing back in a tweet saying, "It's hard to believe this has to be said, but if I'm elected president, I'll spend my Monday mornings working with our nation's top experts to control this virus, not insulting them on Twitter." Some very strong words there from the president's rival.
And we also had some news on the White House changing its testing procedures. What's being done?
Yeah, that's right, Lindsay. Tonight, a White House official tells me random testing is no longer an option for employees on the complex. It is now going to be mandatory. And this comes just 1 week after the president's national security advisor tested positive for the virus. And just this past weekend, a member of the White House press corps did as well, Lindsay.
Rachel Scott, thanks so much. We're joined now by former HUD Secretary and presidential candidate Julian Castro. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, I'd like to just start off with our condolences to you and your family on the passing of your stepmother, Alice, from the coronavirus last month. Is there anything that you'd like to share about her with our audience and also how COVID has impacted your family personally?
We have lost our stepmother, Alice. She and my father, Jesse, were married for 31 years. Alice was wonderful as a stepmom and as a wife to my dad and a mom. She worked for a long time as a cafeteria worker in one of the public school districts in San Antonio. She had a big heart, always wonderful, cooking a meal for folks, and just terrific to be around. It has really driven home for me how terrible this virus has been to so many families across the country, particularly the circumstances that loved ones have faced because, like my stepmom, they go into the hospital and then oftentimes don't get to see their family members for weeks if they recover, or perhaps ever if they don't. And so my message to people out there is just to take this seriously. Take all the precautions that our public health officials tell you that you should take.
Of course, your state of Texas has been hit hard during the summer surge. What should state or local officials be doing that they're not doing right now that might be able to help control the spread in Texas? And as a father of 2 young children, do you think it's safe for Texas to reopen schools? Are you planning on sending your kids back?
The governor of Texas reopened the state too early. And when he reopened, there wasn't sufficient amount of testing or contact tracing, which is what scientific experts tell us you need in order to reopen safely. And on top of that, he has not allowed local communities to tailor their own safety precautions, including mandating that schools reopen. And within the next few weeks, likely that will be in person. He's not allowing local communities, local school districts to make that decision. That's a mistake. My hope is that in the least, state leaders will allow local communities where there is a higher infection rate. They need to be able to control their own destiny by putting safety precautions in place with respect to people going to school and mask requirements and everything else. That has not happened in Texas by and large.
So let me ask you just for a moment to take the political hat off and put the dad hat on. What are you going to do?
Right now, as the father of an 11-year-old who's about to start 6th grade and a 5-year-old who's about to start kindergarten, I don't feel comfortable with my kids going to school in person. I know, from everything that we read as parents that it would be better for them, learning-wise, to be able to be in a classroom with a teacher. But I don't think that it's safe right now. I don't think it's safe for the kids, and I don't trust that it's safe for the teachers and the staff either. So I think that we need to get the virus better under control here in Texas, at least, before we allow schools to fully reopen. That's how I feel as a parent. It's also how I feel as a policymaker.
Of course, the Hispanic community in much of the country has felt a disproportionate impact from this virus, especially among essential workers. As Congress struggles to negotiate this next round of economic relief, is there anything specifically that you think that they should do to address that disparity?
Well, what we need are things like hazard pay for frontline workers, whether that's people in meatpacking plants, grocery stores, fast food workers, a number of other occupations, farm workers. Those include a lot of people who are Latino or Latina. On top of that, we need a greater investment in testing and contact tracing so that we can get this virus under control. In the long term, this has really shown us that we need universal health care in this country. We also need to make sure that there's an eviction moratorium that's extended as part of this new legislation and direct rental assistance, because we have an evictions crisis on our hands.
Yeah, let's turn now to the 2020 race. You're, of course, the former housing secretary under President Obama, and we saw President Trump just last week repeal that fair housing rule to help bring diversity to suburbs. You called that, quote, a naked ploy to drum up racial fears and white resentment. But with many cities still seeing protests and racial upheaval this summer, any concern that playing on those fears could actually work for President Trump?
You know, Donald Trump, I think that he believes he's making a bet that we still live in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, instead of in 2020. He's trying to take us backward. And he thinks that if he can just stoke enough resentment and grievance, especially in white Americans, that might be enough for him to eke out a narrow electoral college victory like he did in 2016. And I don't believe that's the case today. Donald Trump right now is losing the suburbs to Joe Biden. That's amazing, because usually Republicans win the suburbs. That's why Trump is all of a sudden, using this, to him, I'm sure, obscure rule that HUD did to try and drum up fear and resentment among suburbanites. The problem is, one of the main reasons that suburbanites are leaving Donald Trump and the Republicans is because of his bigotry. They're tired of the division. So by doubling down on this division and bigotry, I actually believe he's going to move more people away from him in those suburbs.
Julian Castro, we thank you so much for your time and your insight tonight.
Thanks a lot, Lindsay.
The Manhattan District Attorney suggests his office is investigating whether the hush money paid to porn star Stormy Daniels constitutes bank or insurance fraud. This filing stems from the DA seeking the president's tax returns. The president's attorneys had claimed that the subpoena for those records went too far after the Supreme Court recently ruled that he did not have blanket immunity from criminal procedures. And when we come back, the dramatic moments police move in on a man holding hostages inside a bank and claiming that he has a bomb in his backpack. President Trump setting a deadline on when he wants TikTok sold, but it's what he said about the deal that has some questioning the legality of his proposal. And the emotional plea from a federal judge after a gunman murdered her only child in an ambush at her home. What she wants done so that this never happens again. dramatic video out of Ukraine. What you just saw was Ukrainian security servicemen posing as reporters when they took down a man who had walked into a bank in Kyiv threatening he had a bomb. The man was holding one other person hostage and giving an interview to reporters when he was apprehended. The suspect was dragged away by security forces and the hostage was released. No one was hurt. Next, the heartbreaking call to action from a federal judge turned grieving mother. It's been nearly 2 weeks since Judge Esther Salas's son was shot and killed inside their home. Her husband was also wounded and is now recovering. Tom Yamas has more on the powerful video she's just released.
We're hearing from U.S. District Judge Esther Salas for the first time since a man posing as a FedEx delivery driver opened fire at her New Jersey home, wounding her husband and killing her son Daniel.
While my husband is still in the hospital, recovering from his multiple surgeries, we are living every parent's worst nightmare, making preparations to bury our only child, Daniel.
Salas describing her last moments with her son, who had just celebrated his 20th birthday with a small celebration of friends and his parents.
But as the afternoon progressed, it was time to clean up from the weekend festivities. Daniel and I went downstairs to the basement, and we were chatting, as we always do. And Daniel said, "Mom, let's keep talking. I love talking to you, Mom." And it was at that exact moment that the doorbell rang. And Daniel looked at me and said, "Who is that?" And before I could say a word, he sprinted upstairs. Within seconds, I heard the sound of bullets and someone screaming, "No!"
Authorities say Roy Den Hollander, a self-described anti-feminist attorney, was targeting Salas when her son opened the door that night.
Daniel, being Daniel, protected his father, and he took the shooter's first bullet directly to the chest. The monster then turned his attention to my husband and began to shoot at my husband, one shot after another. Mark was shot 3 times.
Den Hollander was found dead in his car 1 day later from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
And I am here asking everyone to help me ensure that no one ever has to experience this kind of pain. We may not be able to stop something like this from happening again, but we can make it hard for those who target us to track us down.
Judge Salas speaking out to honor her son, but also to demand change, saying she wants to make it harder for judges' home addresses and personal information to be obtained.
As federal judges, we understand that our decisions will be scrutinized, and some may disagree strongly with our rulings. We know that our job requires us to make tough calls. And sometimes those calls can leave people angry and upset. That comes with the territory. And we accept that. But what we cannot accept is when we are forced to live in fear for our lives because personal information like our home addresses can easily be obtained by anyone seeking to do us or our families harm. Unfortunately for my family, the threat was real. My son's death cannot be in vain, which is why I am begging those in power to do something to help my brothers and sisters on the bench. Now, more than ever, we need to identify a solution that keeps the lives of federal judges private.
Such heartfelt words there. Our thanks to Tom. And we still have lots to get to here on Prime. Several areas overseas that believe that they had COVID contained, now battling a resurgence. We'll take you to one of those new hotspots. Back here at home, the bankruptcies continue to mount, with 2 new popular retailers announcing they are struggling to survive. And so far, this has been the most active early start to the hurricane season yet. What that could mean with peak activity still weeks away. But first, our tweet of the day. No need to try this at a pool near you, unless, of course, you're an Olympian. Welcome back, everyone. As if we didn't already have enough, we're contending with Isaias now making its way up the East Coast. The 2020 hurricane season is already off to a record pace. Let's take a look by the numbers. According to NOAA, 9 named storms have already formed before July 30th this year. That's the most ever recorded since the satellite era began back in 1966. In that era, the average date for the 9th named storm would typically be about 2 months from now on October 4th. Isaias is the second Atlantic storm to reach hurricane strength this year, which usually wouldn't happen until around August 28th. And while Isaias is expected to hit the Carolinas tonight as a hurricane, 3 tropical storms have also made landfall on the U.S. since May. One hurricane made direct landfall on the U.S. in July when Hurricane Hannah hit South Texas with up to 16 inches of rainfall and severe flooding in some areas. And we still have a long road ahead. Hurricane season typically peaks around September 10th and doesn't officially end until November 30th. Still to come here on Prime, the first major wildfire in the LA area this season and the evacuation still ongoing. Outrage and anger against a Colorado police department already under fire for several controversial incidents, including the death of Elijah McClain. A family demanding answers about why they were handcuffed and held at gunpoint for a crime they did not commit. And the president wants TikTok sold by mid-September, but is he also trying to set the terms of the deal, and can he? But first, here's some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
Millions of East Coast residents are watching Tropical Storm Isaias, which is expected to make landfall in the Carolinas tonight as a hurricane.
In New York City, they're putting up mile-long barriers in low-lying areas to keep the water out. Coronavirus cases and deaths on the rise in several of the states in Isaias' path. Florida avoiding a direct hit, but forced to close some outdoor testing sites because of Isaias' winds. The Carolinas might not be as lucky.
Shelters will screen people for coronavirus symptoms.
As the COVID-19 pandemic rages on, Americans are split over whether students should be sent back to the classroom.
I think it's been detrimental to her mental and social health, and I'd like to see things get back to where she can get in-person learning.
Today in cities across the country, protesters demonstrated on both sides of the issue. Some saying children would take a significant hit in their development without in-person learning. Others saying it's not worth risking their health.
This is a life or death situation, forcing children to go back into these buildings.
Positive rates are climbing in 25 states. California alone now has more than 500,000 cases.
Talks on coronavirus economic relief resume, but lawmakers have yet to strike a deal, while tens of millions of out-of-work Americans are facing difficult decisions.
We are out here drowning. We are struggling.
We're moving down the track. We still have our differences.
As negotiations grind along slowly, time is a luxury many struggling Americans just don't have. Eviction protections have expired, and according to data collected by the U.S. Census Bureau, more than 23 million Americans reporting they have slight or no confidence in their ability to make this month's rent.
Thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes east of Los Angeles, where the apple fire is growing.
Today, it's an assault on the flames from the ground and the air. This is a first big wildfire causing evacuations during COVID-19. That means precautions being taken at shelters and in the large fire camps to keep firefighters from spreading it, while California's COVID-19 numbers grow.
That whole mountainside is covered with those heavy fuels, coupled with the steep terrain that's inaccessible at certain points. Even for our dozers, it's hard for them to maneuver and cut at such steepness.
Late today, authorities said they believe a malfunctioning car exhaust caused the fire.
Lord & Taylor is now the latest department store chain to file for bankruptcy protection. The coronavirus outbreak accelerating the potential demise of chains already teetering. On its website, the country's oldest department store says it's looking for a buyer and hopes to restructure its $630 million in debt.
You're going to like the way you look. I guarantee it.
With so many working from home, liking the way you look doesn't mean wearing a suit. The parent company of Men's Warehouse and Joseph A. Bank also filing for bankruptcy protection, planning to still operate while reducing its locations.
New terrifying images are coming into the newsroom at this hour of a horrible hot air balloon accident. 3 of them crashed, and now several people, including children, have been rushed to the hospital. Matt Gutman has the very latest.
You can see those 3 hot air balloons hurtling across the Wyoming landscape, the wind driving them into the turf. There's that bounce.
Oh my God.
And then the balloon baskets planted into the mud and the cries of children.
Are you okay, my family?
The local sheriff saying 17 people were transported to the hospital.
It was horrific because you're being dragged down. You don't know when it's going to stop. You know that if you fall out, you're probably going to die because this cage weighs more than a bus is going to just slam right over you.
Dozens of people were aboard that trio of balloons, which took off near Grand Teton Village in Wyoming around 8 a.m.
People are screaming, and I'm worried. My other daughter, Faith, who is 14, she fainted. My wife's shouting to my son to try to keep his arms in. He's trying his best not to fall out.
This drone video shows the aftermath, those giant deflated balloons, the scarred earth, and empty baskets.
Our thanks to Matt Gutman. The Aurora, Colorado Police Department, already in the spotlight because of the Elijah McClain death, is now facing new allegations tonight after a traffic stop involving a black family. That family included small children that were allegedly held at gunpoint and handcuffed by mistake. Clayton Sandell has the details.
Tonight, confusions and questions about why police in Aurora, Colorado, responding to reports of a stolen vehicle, approached a black family in their car, handcuffing several children on the pavement. Police say a license plate scanner alerted them that Brittany Gilliam's car was stolen. She tells KUSA TV she was with her sister, 6-year-old daughter, and teenage nieces when officers rolled up.
That's police brutality. I don't give a damn what nobody say. That's police brutality.
But the department now says Gilliam's license plate had the same number as the real stolen vehicle, but that was a motorcycle from another state.
The mistake is that the officer was going off of what dispatch told them that was confirmed. So he was acting in good faith that was confirmed.
The department is already under fire for several high-profile cases. 3 officers were fired and 1 quit last month after posing for pictures making fun of the chokehold used on Elijah McClain. The 23-year-old massage therapist died after this encounter with police last summer. And Lindsay, adding to the confusion in this case, Gilliam tells me that her car was in fact stolen, but that was way back in February. She says Aurora PD recovered the car the next day and that it should have been taken out of the system so that it didn't show that it was stolen. But there have been a number of odd mishaps involving this department. You'll remember a few months ago, the department admitted that it was wrong for not properly investigating an Aurora police officer who was found passed out drunk in his patrol car in the middle of the street. And the official you saw speaking for the department there in our piece, Vanessa Wilson, she is the interim chief. Tonight, the city of Aurora is naming a permanent chief, and that person, say some community activists and critics of the department, will inherit a department that needs a lot of fixing. Lindsay?
A lot of fixing indeed. Our thanks to you, Clayton. And turning now overseas, just when we thought Asia and the Pacific had managed to control recent coronavirus outbreaks, many are now taking a turn for the worse. Australia, previously a poster child for its handling of the pandemic, declared a state of disaster in Melbourne as cases there rise. And in Hong Kong, life was starting to resemble pre-pandemic times before a sudden surge prompted new social distancing measures. Medical experts there say that this regional pattern of optimism replaced with rounds of lockdowns should sound a warning to the rest of the world. Here's ABC's Britt Clennon.
While the United States continues to battle its first wave, across the world in Hong Kong, the virus was kept at bay for 6 months, with no reported cases in nearly a month, all despite sharing a border with mainland China where the coronavirus first emerged. But it's now hunkering down again, hit by a third wave, its most widespread yet. This fresh spate of cases starting in July, taking the city by surprise. Professor Ben Cowling is a leading epidemiologist at Hong Kong University and advisor to the World Health Organization.
So by April and then May and June, we had very few local infections in Hong Kong.
So what went wrong then? Where was Hong Kong vulnerable?
So we were vulnerable because once those social distancing measures were relaxed, as soon as some local infections came back into the city, there'll be a chance for infection to spread because we'd relaxed the social distancing measures.
Flaws in the city's quarantine system were also apparent, with more than 250,000 people exempted from isolation, including airplane crew and seafarers. Measures are now ramped up. Mandatory mask wearing for indoor and outdoor public spaces, even when exercising, gatherings of no more than 2 people, and for the first time ever, a brief blanket ban on dining.
Hong Kong is a very crowded place and public spaces are quite hard to come by. So as you can see as I walk around some of the public areas, you can see people eating food just in the parks here. Really, it's a case of trying to find wherever they can to sit and eat their food, grab a takeaway lunch.
After seeing these images, the government quickly reversed course, ending a breakfast and lunchtime indoor dining ban. Inside hospital wards, doctors warn of overcrowding.
This wave of outbreak in Hong Kong is much more closer to what happened in Western country a couple of months ago. We have more elderly got infected, we have higher mortality, and actually we cannot get all of them into the hospital because most of our isolation facilities are fully occupied.
Hong Kong opening a makeshift isolation facility at its huge convention site not far from the airport.
We're going to have 500 beds there. So we'll ask those young confirmed cases who are who are relatively well to stay there and get the treatment.
But while cases are rising in Hong Kong, the death toll here is a far cry from the US, with 37 COVID-19 deaths recorded in Hong Kong since the pandemic began. Most of those deaths, however, came in the month of July alone. Hong Kong's sharp spike, part of a pattern across Asia. With Vietnam looking at its first major outbreak, new cases snapped a more than 3-month streak without a single case, locking down the tourism hotspot of Da Nang, and the country's now seeing its first deaths. A new spike rising in Tokyo just as it began easing measures in July, surpassing its rate earlier in the spring. And a growing outbreak in Melbourne, Australia. A strict new 6-week lockdown gets underway as it's declared a state of disaster.
I think it's clear from what's happening in Asia that second waves are going to occur elsewhere in the world. As public health measures are lifted, COVID is going to come back, it's going to resurge.
We need to adapt a very simple social life for a long while if we really want to get this disease under control.
For the first time in the pandemic, mainland Chinese health officials are helping out in Hong Kong. A team of healthcare workers arriving from the mainland on Sunday. The cooperation receiving some scorn at a politically turbulent time. The government postponing legislative elections slated for September by a year, citing coronavirus concerns, as critics say they're attempting to silence the pro-democracy movement.
The schedule of the election, in the context of public health issue, I can't find any reason for delayed it, especially you say delayed it for a year. So I think it is solely a political decision.
Hong Kong not only dealing with a political crisis, but now a renewed health crisis as well. While Asia, the first to be impacted by the outbreak, is now a cautionary warning to the rest of the world of what's likely to come. Britt Clennett, ABC News, Hong Kong.
Tonight, as the NFL gears up for a season in the midst of a pandemic, a head coach has tested positive for COVID-19. Philadelphia Eagles coach Doug Peterson told the team last night that he's asymptomatic. Now, despite the test, the 2018 Super Bowl winning coach said he is extremely optimistic for the season and confident we are going to play. This comes as more NFL players are opting not to play. At least one Eagle has already declined to play. Around the league, 8 Patriots have opted out. The NFL season still currently scheduled to get underway September 10th. Welcome back. President Trump has threatened to ban the Chinese-owned video streaming app TikTok if it's not bought by September 15th. Microsoft had been in talks to buy the company's American operations, but the president said a deal could be easier if Microsoft bought the entire company instead. He then suggested that the company should pay the U.S. Treasury as part of the deal.
I said a very substantial portion of that price is going to have to come into the Treasury of the United States because we're making it possible for this deal to happen. Right now, they don't have any rights unless we give it to them. So if we're going to give them the rights, then it has to come into this country. It's a little bit like the landlord-tenant. Without a lease, the tenant has nothing. So they pay what's called key money, or they pay something. But the United States should be reimbursed or should be paid a substantial amount of money, because without the United States, they don't have anything, at least having to do with the 30%. So I told him that.
So now let's bring in the woman who knows all, tells all, sees all in the world of the economy and finance. ABC's Rebekah Jarvis joins us now with more. Rebekah, some have called that extortion. Is that accurate?
Well, I think, Lindsay, it's not how things are done. In this country, we always review deals. The regulators always take a look at deals, whether they're done between U.S. companies or U.S. companies and foreign entities. And there's no exchange of money because regulators say yes to the deal. There are oftentimes benefits that ultimately come down the road. So, for example, if you are Microsoft and you're purchasing TikTok, and TikTok is primarily housed overseas, and you bring all of those people to the United States and you employ more people, you ultimately will pay more tax revenue to the U.S. Treasury and you will employ more people. But as part of the deal itself, there is no precedent, Lindsay, for somebody or a company paying the U.S. government money because they say yes to the deal.
The larger debate over a deal for TikTok revolves around Chinese control of the app and security issues that could present. So how real of a threat is that, and would a deal by Microsoft solve that problem?
Well, Lindsay, think about the fact that there are 100 million users of TikTok here in the United States. ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, is Chinese company, and the Chinese government, under their law, can turn to any Chinese-based company and say, give us the data on those individuals. Now, we don't know whether that's ever happened. We don't know, for example, whether they could take propaganda and shove it down the throats of TikTok users. We know how active TikTok users are in the United States. We know that a lot of them are highly opinionated and share those opinions widely, and for all we know are very capable of sharing those opinions without having any repercussions. But it's something to think about in the longer term about our relationship with China as we continue down this path, and especially as we think about questions around privacy. It's not just a question, by the way, about privacy for Chinese companies imposing here in the United States. It's also a question that we've yet to fully answer about our own companies that are based here in the U.S. that have access to huge amounts of data and use that data to their advantage. It's an important conversation that we need to be thinking about. Microsoft, in owning TikTok, if they eventually do, will be another player in this world of Google and Facebook and Amazon and Apple. And these are gigantic companies, Lindsay, with outsized impact on both how we live our lives and also even how the stock market performs.
Rebekah Jarvis, thanks so much. And when we come back, who's bad? These seniors, that's who. Meet the mastermind behind these viral photos. Back now with El Paso Strong, a memorial for the victims of last year's mass shooting at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. 1 year ago today, a gunman killed 23 people and injured 20 more after opening fire at the busy store. It was the deadliest targeted attack on Latinos in modern U.S. history. Today, mourners gathered with 23 crosses outside the store to commemorate those who lost their lives. While there's so much downside to the pandemic, one small bright spot that we've seen time and time again is that quarantine creativity. Well, meet the Senior Home Activities Coordinator who brought a brainstorm to life, transforming his residents into some of the stars of your favorite album covers.
Senior portraits are, of course, a time-honored tradition, but these photos are in a class all by themselves.
I I do all the activities at the home for the residents.
Robert Specker is the activities coordinator at Sidmore Lodge in London. When the pandemic forced his seniors into lockdown, he saw it as the perfect opportunity to lift their spirits by launching his latest idea. Robert says his residents were all up for participating the moment he introduced the idea.
The seniors know exactly what I'm like, so they know my madcap ideas. So we did the mannequin challenge a few years ago. We did the toilet roll challenge at the beginning of lockdown. So this was just something else I've been thinking about.
Robert acted as set director, hairstylist, makeup artist, and photographer to bring the photos to life. Albums like Adele's 21, reimagined with 93-year-old Vera as its cover star.
She knew who some of the songs were because I played them to her. She already had the hairstyle, really, and she carried it off perfectly.
A true blue copy of Madonna's hit 80s album.
Really, Lily really enjoyed it. I think she did such a good job with the Madonna. I'd like to see what Madonna thinks of Lily.
And who's bad? Robert's resident, Toba David, that's who.
Once she was wearing the leather jacket, I was like, there's Michael Jackson. Once she got into position, I said, give me your best Michael Jackson look. That was down to a fine art.
All the small things, true care, truth brings.
Blink-182's iconic 1999 Enema of the State cover posed a unique challenge for Robert and resident Hilda to pull it off. You can say he nailed all the small things to get this photo just right.
Gloves were easy to come by. I found an image that was similar to the butterfly. She had a red top. I borrowed one of the kitchen chefs. I borrowed his coat. I made the nurse's hat, and I was kind of all ready to go.
After snapping pictures of some rather mature subjects, he then went home to a photo shoot of a different kind.
But the funny thing about that one, less than an hour after the photo was taken, my third daughter, Olivia, was born.
And of course, a nod to British musical giant David Bowie's classic Aladdin Sane cover with the lovely Roma, who Robert says was a great sport.
I said, okay, now I'm going to do the lightning bolt on your face. That was hilarious in itself. She was such a good model, and she got the pose so perfectly.
So perfect, in fact, that David Bowie's widow, supermodel Iman, took notice herself.
The fact that David Bowie's widow and son have retweeted that photo is mind-blowing.
Robert says all the love the photos have received have been a real bright spot in the lives of his residents.
I don't think we could have, beyond our wildest dreams, have imagined how many people have seen this and responded so kindly. I can only say thank you, and that is an understatement because you've really cheered up all our residents.
Robert is just beginning.
I still have a fair few ideas in my mind, but all I can say is just watch this space.
We will be watching that space for sure. Before we go tonight, our image of the day. If you think that looks like a space butterfly, well, you're not alone. These are images of a planetary nebula or a giant cloud of gas around a star that has yet to explode. They were taken by the European Space Observatory's Very Large Telescope, which is actually what it's called. And those images are believed to be somewhere between 3,000 and 6,500 light years away. That is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.